Imagine being shoved into a tower the day the monsters arrived, told to climb 100 floors to earn your way home, and then the instant you reach the top, waking up on the very first floor again, and again, for 12 years. Everyone else who entered those towers either died or escaped in a few terrified weeks. So why does exactly one man stay trapped for over a decade, cycling the same 100 floors more than 1,000 times? While the world outside barely notices he is gone, someone did this to him on purpose. By the end of this recap, you will know who and why, and you will understand what kind of monster a man becomes when he is forced to grind a tutorial for 12 straight years. This is the advanced player of the tutorial tower, and I'm going to walk you through the whole story, beginning to end. Let's get into it. In the year 2006, the world ended quietly, and then refused to finish the job. Towers appeared, vast, impossible spires of stone and light rising overnight in cities across the planet, each one humming with a power nobody could name, and from those towers spilled monsters, creatures out of nightmare and folklore, goblins and ogres and things with no names at all pouring into a world that had no defense against them. Ordinary, unarmed humanity met its first apocalypse with absolutely nothing. But the towers did not merely attack, they selected. Across the world, people were taken, pulled from their ordinary lives without warning or consent and deposited inside a tower's lowest floor, handed a single, simple instruction by a cold and absolute voice. Climb. Clear all 100 floors, reach the summit, and you may leave. Stronger, awakened, return to a world that now needs warriors. Fall, and you simply die in the dark. These were the first hunters. The first generation, frightened office workers and students and shopkeepers thrown into a lethal video game with no tutorials of their own, learning the rules by watching the people beside them die. Most never made it past the early floors. A rare few, the strong, the lucky, the ruthless, clawed their way to the 100th floor and walked back out transformed, carrying powers that would let them stand between humanity and the gates that kept opening. Among the people taken that first day was a perfectly unremarkable young man named Hyeonu Kim. There was nothing special about him. No hidden bloodline, no secret talent, no destiny stamped on his forehead. He was simply a man who happened to be standing in the wrong place when a tower decided it wanted him. He entered the tutorial tower alongside dozens of other terrified strangers, and like all of them, he began slowly and painfully to climb. And here is where this story diverges from every other survivor's. Because Hyeonu reached the 100th floor, he cleared the tutorial, he earned his way out, and then he opened his eyes, and he was standing on the first floor again. So let me ask you to sit with that for a moment, because the Manhwa does, and it is the engine of everything that follows. You have done the impossible, you've survived 100 floors of monsters that killed almost everyone who entered beside you. You've reached the exit, you can taste the outside world, your home, your family, the sky, and the tower simply resets you to the bottom and tells you without explanation or apology to do it all again. The first time, Hyeonu assumes it is a mistake, some cruel glitch in the tower's machinery, so he climbs again 100 floors, the summit, the reset, the first floor. He climbs a third time and a fourth, and somewhere in there, the horrifying truth settles into his bones. This is not a malfunction, this is a curse. Something has been laid upon him specifically, a chain that the other trainees do not carry, binding him to this tower while the rest of the world moves on without him. The exit is real, it is simply not for him. A weaker mind would have broken. Many would have laid down on the first floor and refused to move, and let the monsters end it. And the Manhwa is honest about how close Hyeonu comes to exactly that. How the despair of an endless, pointless loop is a kind of torture no monster could match. But Hyeonu does not break. Instead, somewhere around the 100th run, or the 200th, he makes a decision that defines him. If he cannot leave, then he will become the absolute master of the only world he has. He will learn every floor until it holds no secrets. He will memorize every monster's pattern, every trap, every hidden room. He will treat the tower not as a prison but as a training ground with infinite respawns. And he will grind himself into something the tower never intended to create. So he does. Over and over, 100 floors at a time. He fights the same bosses 10,000 times until killing them is muscle memory. He pushes his stats past every ceiling the system tries to impose. He runs the numbers, breaks the mechanics, finds the exploits the designers never imagined a human would have the patience to discover, because no ordinary human has 12 years and 1,300 attempts to find them. He stops being a climber and becomes, in the slang of Korean gaming that gives the series its title, a goinmal, an old-timer. A veteran so absurdly over-leveled for the content that he is less a player than a force of nature politely pretending to participate. By the time the curse finally inexplicably breaks, after roughly 1,350 complete runs of the tutorial tower, after 12 years inside, the man who walks out is not the frightened nobody who walked in. Hyeonu Kim has maxed everything a human can max. His stats are not high, they are off the chart the system used to measure them. The monsters of the tutorial tower, the things that slaughtered the first generation of hunters by the 1,000, are to him a chore he could do in his sleep. He is, quite simply and without exaggeration, one of the strongest beings ever to walk the earth, and almost nobody on the outside has any idea he exists. But raw strength is not why this story works. Watch what happens when a man 12 years out of date steps back onto a planet that has reorganized itself entirely around the thing he just escaped. Because the world Hyeonu returns to is not the world he left. 12 years have passed outside too. Humanity did not lie down and die. The first generation of hunters who survived their towers became the foundation of a new order, and in the years since, hunters have become the most important people on the planet. They are celebrities, soldiers, and civic institutions all at once. They form guilds, corporate military hunting organizations with rankings, sponsorships, and political clout. Nations measure their power in the strength of their registered hunters. The gates that keep opening are managed, more or less, by an entire global apparatus that did not exist when Hyeonu was taken. And into this sleek, established hierarchy walks a man in 12-year-old clothes, with no guild, no ranking, no paperwork, and no idea how any of it works, who happens to be stronger than all of it combined. The comedy of the series lives right there, and it is played beautifully straight. Hyeonu does not announce himself. He has no interest in fame or guild politics. He has spent 12 years dreaming of nothing more elaborate than a warm meal and a quiet life. But he is so far beyond the curve that he cannot help but break things simply by existing. He wanders into a dungeon a top-ranked guild has been struggling with and clears it on his way to lunch. He registers as a hunter, and the measuring instruments quietly refuse to believe the numbers. Veteran hunters who have spent 12 years becoming the elite of a new world meet a smiling, unbothered man who could end any of them with a flick of the wrist and does not appear to realize it is impressive. And crucially, he is not unknown to everyone. This is one of the Manhwa's cleverest touches. Over his 12 years and 1,300 runs, Hyeonu shared the tutorial tower with countless other trainees passing through on their own single climbs. To them, he was a legend whispered between floors, the impossible veteran who had always been there, the man who seemed to know the tower better than the tower knew itself, who would sometimes appear to help a doomed party and then vanish back into his endless loop. They called him the advanced player. So when Hyeonu finally emerges, there are powerful people scattered across the world's guilds who climbed their towers years ago and have never forgotten the terrifying old-timer who once saved their lives, and who now realize with no small awe that he is finally outside. One of those connections becomes the emotional heart of the early story. During his endless years inside, Hyeonu took a young survivor of a wiped-out party under his wing, a girl he trained patiently, master to student, teaching her a fighting style he had cobbled together from his own grinding and his half-remembered love of action comics. She eventually cleared her own tower and went out into the world, and by the time Hyeonu emerges, she has become a formidable hunter and guild founder in her own right. Building the Pado Guild and carrying his teachings far beyond the tower walls, the man who spent 12 years utterly alone discovers that he was never quite as alone as he believed, that he left fingerprints on the new world before he ever set foot in it. But settling into a quiet life is not an offer, because Hyeonu walks out of that tower carrying one consuming question that no amount of ramen or rest will silence. Who did this to him? Who singled him out? Who laid the curse that stole 12 years of his life and chained him to 100 floors of hell? He did not climb 1,300 times by accident. Someone chose him, and he intends to find them. The hunt for that answer pulls the story up out of comedy and into its deeper machinery, and it begins with a power Hyeonu does not fully understand he has. Among everything the tower forged in him, one ability stands apart. Hyeonu can look at a person, or a creature, or a thing and read its hidden truth. At first, it is almost useless, a flicker of cryptic flavor text, half of it blacked out like a game description with the important parts redacted. But the more powerful enemies he defeats, the more this sight sharpens. Page by page the redactions lift. He begins to perceive not just stats and weaknesses but motives, the true intentions hidden behind a smile, the lie underneath a friendly word, even the surface of a person's thoughts. This is the first real clue that Hyeonu's 12 years was not a punishment. They were a forging, because that scanning eye is not a hunter's skill at all. It is the power of a guardian, one of the entities that administrate the towers from within. Hyeonu was not simply trapped, he was being built into something the tower's own hierarchy was never meant to contain. And here the curtain pulls back on the cosmic machinery behind the whole catastrophe. The towers were not a natural disaster. They were made, constructed and overseen by a small circle of godlike architects, the beings who designed the system that descended on humanity in 2006. Chief among them is the one called the Maker, and his partner the Administrator, the original authors of the towers, who built them for reasons far older and stranger than mere cruelty. But the Maker and the Administrator were betrayed. Their own colleagues, the architects known as the Tuner, the Engineer, and the Designer, turned on them, seizing control of the towers and twisting the system to serve their own greed, running humanity through a meat grinder of endless climbs for purposes that have nothing to do with humanity's survival. The Maker, robbed of control and unable to fight the traitors directly, did the only thing left to him. He cheated. He reached into the human chaff being fed through his stolen machine and chose a single stubborn, unbreakable man, and he laid a curse upon him that was, in truth, a gift in the cruelest possible wrapping. He locked Hyeonu in the tutorial loop not to torment him, but to temper him, to grind one ordinary human over 12 years and 1,300 runs into a weapon strong enough to challenge the architects who had hijacked the towers. The curse that stole Hyeonu's life was the desperate gambit of a betrayed god trying to plant a champion inside the enemy's own system. The man who wanted only a quiet life, in other words, was drafted before he was ever born into this story, selected precisely because of one quality the Maker prized above strength or talent, a tenacity that simply would not quit, no matter how many times the world reset him to the bottom. So what does the man do once he learns his suffering was someone else's strategy? This is where the manhwa earns its premise. A lesser power fantasy would have Hyeonu's rage or sulk, or be paralyzed by the revelation that this entire ordeal was orchestrated. Hyeonu, characteristically, mostly just gets on with it. He is too old, too tired, and too genuinely decent to waste his freedom on bitterness. The traitor architects who stole 12 years of his life are a problem to be solved, and he is, after all, the single most overpowered solution the world has to offer. And so the second half of his story becomes a steady, satisfying campaign of a god-tier veteran cleaning up a world that has been quietly mismanaged in his absence. The gates keep opening, the monsters keep coming, the guilds and governments do their fumbling best. And again, Hyeonu appears at the edge of some catastrophe that should cost hundreds of lives and ends it almost casually, because to a man who farmed the tutorial tower 1,300 times, an A-rank gate is barely a warm-up. He saves the world repeatedly, more or less by accident, on his way to the people he actually wants to find. But the series never lets him coast on pure power, because his guardian's sight keeps the stakes human. He can see motives. He can read the lie under the handshake, and what that reveals is that the real danger to humanity is not always the monsters, it is the people. The traitor architects have agents and beneficiaries woven through the New World's hunter establishment, those who profit from the towers staying exactly as broken as they are, who have no interest in a returned veteran upending the system. Hyeonu's quiet retirement keeps colliding with conspiracies he can see straight through, and his refusal to look away, even when looking away would be easier, is what slowly turns a reluctant old-timer into the world's reluctant guardian, in fact as well as in the name. What makes the whole thing land, beneath the wish fulfillment and the deadpan jokes, is that Hyeonu never stops being the man from the first floor. 12 years of isolation did not make him cold. If anything, having lost so much time, he treasures small things, companionship, a decent meal, the students and allies who gathered to him. With a sincerity the slick new hunter world has mostly forgotten. He's overpowered, yes, absurdly so, but he is kind and patient and tired in a way that makes his strength feel earned rather than granted. The tower took 12 years from him. It did not manage to take the person underneath. So where does the advanced player's story sit today? The webtoon is ongoing, well past 100 episodes, and it adapts a Korean web novel that built a devoted following precisely because it understands its own appeal so well. This is not a story straining to be tragic or profound. It knows exactly what it is. A deeply satisfying tale about a decent man who paid an unthinkable price, came out the other side with the power to make that price mean something, and now gets to be the strongest person in every room he walks into. The pleasure of it is watching an established, self-important world meet a man it cannot measure, cannot rank and cannot intimidate, and slowly realize it had better be very, very polite to him. The threads still unspooling are the ones that matter. The war against the traitor architects who hijacked the towers, the Maker's deeper purpose for the system, and the question of whether Hyeonu, having been forged into a weapon, can ever truly put the weapon down and simply live. He spent 12 years climbing toward an exit that kept vanishing. The whole story, in the end, is about a man finally allowed to walk through the door, and discovering that the world on the other side needs him to keep climbing anyway. The advanced player of the tutorial tower began as a web novel by the author, known as Bangasok Gimsi, the Indoor Kim, and reached a global audience through its webtoon adaptation. Written by Ju Yong Hwang, with art by Omagam. It is one of the genre's most purely enjoyable takes on the trapped and overpowered premise. A series that takes the most absurd of setups, a man grinding a tutorial for 12 years and plays it with just enough heart to make you root for him long enough after he has stopped needing anyone's help. If you love a protagonist who has already done the impossible before the story even starts, who is less an underdog than a tired old god trying to enjoy his retirement, this is one of the best the genre has to offer, and you can read it on Webtoon. And if this recap held you to the end, subscribe, because Manhwa Recap Vault covers the stories that define the genre, and the towers, and everything that climbs them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next recap.